Welcome to Baby Boomer Tales. My name is Jim. You can find our podcast wherever fine podcasts are served. Also, you can visit our webpage, Baby Boomer Tales, and there are links to many places you can hear our podcast, including Spotify, our YouTube channel, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Podcasts, and more. We also have our Boomers General Store there, where you can buy our famous Baby Boomer Tales coffee mug and other products. Do yourself a favor and visit our webpage for a few minutes. We appreciate it if you do. Well, they say winter's on us. Actually, winter's been here for over a month now, but it's felt more like fall. We've really had no cold to speak of and no snow at all. And in fact, we're kind of in a drought type thing where we had very little rain even. But this morning I woke up and it was 6 degrees and it was -8 or something like that, wind chill. Very cold. I went to the grocery store and it was freezing. In preparation for this, because the news has been all about it, and by the time you hear this, probably the storm will be over. But yesterday I filled the bird feeders and I brought in firewood. Now I had about a half a rack, or rick they call it, I think, of firewood in the garage drying out. But I filled that up just in case. You know, one report says we're supposed to get over a foot. And a foot of snow here is quite a bit. Now, a foot of snow back in north central Colorado Rocky Mountains, where I was born and raised, it's nice to have a foot of snow, but it's not anything monumental or anything. But here it is. Everything will be closed. Everyone's freaking out. I went to the grocery store today. I'm recording this on Friday, and Friday's my day to go to the grocery store, and the place was full. People all freaked out, think it's Snowmageddon. Armageddon, Snowmageddon, or something coming. So whatever, I'm here in the house now. The house is nice and warm. We're not planning on going anywhere. It's not that we can't go somewhere, it's just that the people are crazy on the roads because they don't see weather like this very often. So I try to stay off the roads as much as possible. Y'all get your Social Security cost of living increase yet? I'm sure you have. It was supposed to be 2.8% cost of living raise, which really does not keep up with inflation even a little bit, but every little bit helps, I guess. But the Medicare Part B, you can get Medicare Part A for free, but it doesn't cover a lot of things. So you can get the Part B for a fee, and that Part B went up 9.68%. So actually your cost of living was not 2.8%, it was 2.31%. Yeah, now there's a lot of controversy about Social Security and Medicare and all that, and I'm not going to get into it. The way I look at it, even though the government is making money hand over fist on it, and they keep saying it's going broke, that's just to keep you freaked out just a little. But in reality, most of us would be destitute and homeless if it wasn't for Social Security, because you're so busy trying to make a living, trying to raise a family, trying to, have a car that runs and a roof over your head and all that stuff during your working years, say age 20 to 65, that most people did not save enough to live on their retirement. So the Social Security, where it's mandatory, they take it out and invest it for you. For the vast majority of the populace, this was not a bad deal for them. There's a lot of things, though, in it that if you wanted to complain, there's plenty of room for complaints. But just be thankful that you're getting that Social Security check every month. It could be a lot worse. We live in the land of the free and the home of the brave. Our song of the week is Old Hippie by the Bellamy Brothers in 1985. It reached number 2 on the Billboard Hot Country Singles charts. This great song is about someone my age back in the 80s, and it covers things that he had gone through in his life, like the Vietnam War, Woodstock, smoking pot, John Lennon's assassination, and all this stuff, and how he exists in this world of the 1980s. Yeah, he gets off on country music because disco left him cold. He ain't trying to change nobody. He's just trying real hard to adjust. When I was in the 7th grade, all these little towns that had elementary schools all around us shipped all those kids to the junior high. So the kids from the lake town, which I didn't know any of them, the kids from the icebox town and the ski town and the hot springs town, they all came to my town that had the junior senior high school in it. Well, Wayne, that very day, introduced me to this guy, and he wasn't very tall. He said his name was Dan. And so I looked at Wayne like, what in the world? And so Dan started hanging around with us more than anything. Now, Wayne was real good about meeting people, and he kept introducing me to this person and that person, the other person, and all that stuff. But Dan just kind of seemed to fit in with us, and after a while I got so I liked him just fine. And he lived up in the ski town, up about 20 miles from my little hometown. And he had to ride the bus to school every single day. Well, as years rolled by, Dan, Wayne, and I were kind of like the three amigos or something like that, you know what I mean? We just hung out together a lot. And Dan became a very, very good friend of mine. He became my hitchhiking buddy. I made a podcast once about, I think I was a senior in high school and we had a very bad day, or I did. And I talked Dan into going with me, and we were going to hitchhike to San Diego and walk up the beach to Washington. And we caught a ride, and by the time we made it outside of Gallup, New Mexico, a highway patrolman stopped the guy that was driving, and we ended up in Gallup, New Mexico jail for a while, till my mother came and rescued us. Dan also lived with my family for a couple summers, I do believe, up at our ranch house, Old Eagle Eye. That was amazing. My dad must have liked Dan, because I can't even imagine my dad allowing one of my buddies to live with us. In fact, one time I took off. I had to not come home without a haircut, so I hitchhiked to Denver, caught a bus to St. Francis, Kansas, hitchhiked up to Nebraska, over to Wyoming, down into Utah, and hitchhiked back home. I was about a week gone and never told my parents where I was or where I was going or if I was dead or alive. And I remember I had to walk up from the highway where these hippies let me off right at our driveway up to the ranch house. And it was probably a half a mile walk, maybe 3/4 of a mile. And I walked up there, and the first person to greet me, standing out there on the porch, was old Dan. So I asked him how my folks were and how much trouble I was going to be in. So he told me that everything's going to be all right. One time Dan and I got our billy goats. We had 2 billy goats. They were the meanest guys in the world. They'd pee on you and jump on your car and all this bad stuff. But Dan and I got them drunk on 3-2 Coors beer. That was a good afternoon. Dan and the goats and me all made friends. And those goats never were as mean to me after that day. One time Dan witnessed a situation out there at the ranch where I lost my cool probably more than I ever lost it ever in my life. My brother John and I were fighting, and John must have known that I flipped a switch or something, because he ran into this outhouse we had there. Now, it was no longer an outhouse. It wasn't a working outhouse. All the holes had been covered up inside, but we stored stuff in there, like fencing materials and stuff. There was a roll of barbed wire fence laying outside that little outhouse, and John was locked inside the outhouse, so I took that roll of barbed wire fence and I threw it right through that door, shattered the door in a million pieces. Oh my goodness, I was so mad, but that straightened me out real fast, like, oh no, Dad's gonna kill us. Dan had a sister. Her name was Bev. She was a very pretty girl. She was a year younger than Dan. I never took Bev out because of our friendship, Dan and mine, but one prom I did end up taking her out. She didn't have a date or something. That turned into a terrible, terrible experience for all involved, and I never asked her out again. She was a very nice gal. She married this drummer up there in the rodeo town, the cowboy town. He was a great drummer. I think she made a good life for herself. I don't know. Dan was raised by his dad and his grandma. I never ever asked what happened to his mother. To this day I have no idea. I've speculated several times, but I don't know. Now I know Dan would have answered me if I'd asked. I used to hang out at his house quite a bit, and his grandma was always very nice, but she kind of scared me just a little. And you could tell Dan's dad was very, very sad. Always very sad. Girls liked old Dan. They always called him Danny. Now, he wasn't as tall as me. I said he was this little guy. He was little in 7th grade, but, he grew up regular size, but he wasn't as tall as me or Wayne. He was a very, very talented individual. He was in all the special choirs, madrigal and all this stuff. He could play a couple instruments. I talked about him last week, dancing. Girls liked him, take him to the dances because he was a good dancer and all that stuff. One time, him and I wrote a song together called Polka Dot Peg. Old Polka Dot Peggy. Anyway, I still kind of remember that song. I used to have it written down, and if I looked real hard, I might be able to find that still. We never did anything with it. He wasn't in my band that I was in or any of that stuff. As he got older and we graduated from high school, Dan drove a Volkswagen bus. He's the only guy I ever knew that owned a Volkswagen bus. I've always said that I wasn't a hippie, that I never wore tie-dye, and I never owned a Volkswagen bus, but my friend Dan did. He is a very, very dear friend of mine. Once we graduated from high school, Wayne and I really went our separate ways. I only saw him one time after that, after graduation night, that I remember. But Dan hung around and we kind of did stuff together and stuff. Well, then, as years rolled by, he had his life up at the area, the ski area. I remember he was a ditch rider for an irrigation ditch. I always thought that'd be the greatest job in the world, just make sure that irrigation ditch is going, but in reality, he probably had to get in the middle of people fighting over water all the time. Well, after I got married, we had Dan and some girl over for dinner, and we were going to play some games one night. And we had our first child, Aaron, and that night when we were trying to play a game, she just screamed bloody murder. She wouldn't stop. She was only probably less than 6 months old. Her mother couldn't console her or anything. I know it made Dan very uneasy and very uptight, and he complained about it a little. That was the last time I ever saw that man. I hear he lives in New Mexico now, and I really should try to contact him before we both get too old. He was a dear, dear friend of mine. In a lot of ways, he was closer than Wayne and I ever were. I think I always call Wayne my best friend growing up because we had that thing starting first day of kindergarten. But really, about the time high school started, I probably spent more time with Dan than I did Wayne. funny the twists and turns life will throw at you. People that are in your life that when you remember them, you can't help but smile. And thank God above for the blessing of a friend when you really needed one. Well, that's about all I really have. I'm sure I'll think of other things later, share with you about my friend Dan. But when I think of people like Dan and Wayne, some of my old friends, I'm reminded that time goes by in a blink of an eye. So always be kind and always help whenever you can. I'll be back next Wednesday. That's my plan. Thank you for riding along today. Peace out.